All right, hello and welcome to the very next episode of PatristiCast. I believe this is episode 34. Today, I am delighted to welcome a first-time guest here, Dr. Elisa Uusimäki. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, that's perfect.
Who hails from Finland, but you are currently at Aarhus in Denmark. Professor of Old Testament in the School of Culture and Society there, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I also found out, as I was doing a little bit of research on how I was going to introduce you, you're currently the principal investigator of ERC project, right? European Research Council, an intersectional analysis of ancient Jewish travel narratives. So, Dr. Uusimäki, welcome to PatristiCast.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction and also for the invitation. It's really a nice opportunity to be able to talk a bit about my research.
Well, I invited you on after reading your article from 2018 in the Journal for the Study of the Pseudepigrapha, titled "A Mind in Training: Philo of Alexandria on Jacob's Spiritual Exercises." But before we get into the article itself, you are a scholar of the Old Testament. So can you talk a little bit about how, because Philo's not usually associated with the study of the Old Testament. How did you find your way to this first century Hellenistic Jewish philosopher?
Yeah, thanks. No, that's a good question. I really don't have the kind of traditional background of a scholar working with Philo of Alexandria. It seems that most people get to Philo, they have background in early Christian studies or New Testament studies, and then wish to understand the Greek-speaking Judaism of the late Second Temple period. Also in Europe, especially in Southern Europe, there are scholars who first study philosophy and ancient philosophy, and that's their way to Philo. But so I actually have a background in Hebrew Bible Old Testament studies. So I studied theology at the University of Helsinki in Finland, where I come from, and also did some Semitic philology and studied religion. And my major was always in Hebrew Bible Old Testament, but in Helsinki it was understood in a very broad way. There were many of us who were working on Second Temple Judaism, and all kinds of canonical boundaries had been deconstructed at the time I came to work on this material, and I was also working on the scrolls, on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So my PhD thesis was on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there was a bigger research group working on new finds and more kind of philologically oriented work. And then during the time I was working on one particular manuscript found at Qumran, text classified as a wisdom text. So I had an interest in kind of wisdom and questions of the good life. Because of that work, but then during my PhD study, I also spent 1 year as a visiting doctoral student at Yale. And when I went there, it actually happened to be the first year when Hindi Naiman was at Yale, so she had just relocated there from Toronto, and I had an opportunity to take some courses with her, and then she encouraged us to read Philo. And not just Philo, but to read Philo in conversation with the Dead Sea Scrolls and other texts written in Semitic languages from the same period. And it was really this approach that she had that I got intrigued by, and also made me excited about biblical studies. I had this, I don't know, somehow my whole PhD project, it was exciting, but I also had this feeling that, I don't know, this is not the kind of work I want to do for the rest of my life, but also to be kind of taken seriously as a biblical scholar, you also have to do a certain amount of solid philological work. And then I kind of thought that, okay, when I get my PhD done, and then I'm free to do and study whatever I want, and yeah, I was interested in wisdom as a phenomenon, but somehow I was, yeah, people were always stuck with the question of wisdom as a literary genre, or what is wisdom, and I thought that I want to, you know, shift the attention a bit and like ask different questions about wisdom, and I got really interested in the question of the wise person, and instead of asking what is wisdom, looking at portrayals of a wise person in the early Jewish tradition. And then as a postdoc, I got a project funded by the Academy of Finland to work on early Jewish portraits of the wise person, and I was looking at different types of materials, Book of Ben Sira, the masculine figure from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then also Philo of Alexandria's discussion on wisdom and the sophos, and sage. So that somehow, brought me to Philo. It's not, I guess, I could say that I'm interested in Philo, but also in many other things. I'm scholar of early Jewish tradition, and wish to see or like bring different types of Jewish materials from this period into conversation with each other across linguistic and cultural and geographical boundaries, and I think there's a lot to do. Philo has a big corpus, and he has often been studied from a bit different angle. So I think there is a lot to do in terms of bringing Philo into conversation with the Hebrew Bible and Second Temple Jewish material in particular, and up until now, as you can also see from this article on the figure of Jacob, it's these questions of wisdom and virtue and the good life that I've been interested in, and this is of course part of this wider reconsideration of wisdom, trying to move away from the idea of wisdom as a category of literature, and leaving aside the question of how to define wisdom as a genre or as kind of macro genre, encompassing different types of texts, and instead of thinking of wisdom from the viewpoint of lived ancient religion, and what does it mean to live wisely? How does one become a wise person? How does one retain or cultivate wisdom? So I think there we really need to bring Philo into the conversation. The words wisdom or sage appear like hundreds of times in his text, but still there has been this strange trend in biblical studies that Philo has not been part of the conversation on wisdom literature, for instance, which is kind of crazy, because Wisdom of Solomon, it's written in Greek. Everyone understands that, yes, it's part of the wisdom corpus, but then somehow Philo has been left out of this conversation. But I think there's no reason to do so, and I'm sure that Philo can be relevant to a lot of conversations in biblical studies and Hebrew Bible Old Testament studies. But my angle has been this question of wisdom as something lived and embodied and performed, and also wisdom as a form of culture, maybe one could say.
Well, you bring up some interesting questions there. On the one hand, you have Philo in the first century, at the very end of Second Temple Judaism. The temple gets destroyed in 70 CE. He's working at a time when Judaism and Greek culture were converging. And as you say, wisdom written in Greek. So there's a lot of crossover there between Hellenism and Judaism. And one of the things that I didn't really know until I started working on my own article on the interpretation of Jacob and Esau is the extent to which some of these Second Temple Jewish writers were grappling with this text. And you mentioned Qumran. I'm thinking of like Jubilees, has stuff to say about Jacob and Esau. And if I remember right, isn't it Jubilees that it does something very similar to Philo in their treatment? The author focuses, I think it's Jubilees, on Esau being the hunter, the outdoorsman, and Jacob dwelling in houses. And there's some
and also learning the art of writing.
Pardon?
And also learning the art of writing.
Learning the art of writing, yeah. So there's a connection with
education,
school and education, whereas Esau is kind of this rustic dolt who's out hunting wild animals. I thought that was quite interesting. And as you brought up Qumran, the question arose, is there any evidence that does Philo ever talk about Qumran literature in his writings that you're aware of? Do you know if there's any kind of influence, however difficult that question is, going on there between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think directly we don't know much about Philo's competence in Semitic languages, for instance, but I do have a colleague in the Netherlands, Pierre Hadot, who has written a comparative study of Pesharim, the commentary text from the Dead Sea Scrolls that comment on kind of line by line commentaries on prophetic texts, and also on Psalms, which were understood as prophetic in the Scrolls movement. And then he compares this to the American commentary tradition in Alexandria, and makes the argument that these two commentary traditions actually have a lot in common. So I think I'm not a specialist on the topic, but I think you should maybe invite him to talk about that. But then of course Philo does also when he talks about the group of Therapeuti, a group of Jewish philosophers who withdraw from Alexandria to the Meroitic Lake to dedicate themselves to asceticism. So he presents the group in parallel to the Essenes. So now, of course, the whole question of what's the relation between the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls movement, that's also up to debate. For long, people took for granted that it's the same thing, but there are also scholars who are really don't think so. The majority would think that there's some link between the Essenes and the scrolls, although we should study the classical sources and the scrolls perhaps separately, because their authors have different intentions and they write in different cultural registers, and therefore it has to be done in a nuanced way to bring this into conversation. But at least so Philo, he presents the Therapeuti in parallel with the Essenes, so at least he's aware of what he sees as philosophical groups in the Levant, so and talks about philosophers in Syria, and so he has this Jewish philosophy for him is not something that only happens in Alexandria, but he acknowledges that there are forms of philosophical life among the Jews in different parts of the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yeah, I completely forgot about that part on the contemplative life where he brings that up. Okay, so let's maybe get into your article specifically here now. And a big influence, a major influence on this article is Pierre Hadot and his book, A Philosophy as a Way of Life. I tried to find that before starting this recording, but it's gone somewhere.
Here, Qu'est-ce que la philosophie antique?
Oh, you have that one. Yep. Okay. Very good.
Oh, this is the English translation, and then there is the other one, the collection of the essays. But that one I don't have, sadly, in my office. But this one I have as English translation. Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about Hadot, because his big thesis, it was that ancient philosophy. It wasn't just it wasn't just the practice of logic and argumentation. It encompassed all of life, And he really brings out this notion that philosophical commentaries were products of this philosophical way of life. In some ways, they were part of the spiritual exercises of these philosophers. Can you say a little something about ancient philosophy as a way of life, and perhaps a lead into these enumerated spiritual exercises that you bring out in your essay?
Yeah, thanks. Of course, when we study the ancient world, we have to deconstruct a lot of things. There was no term for religion in Hebrew or Greek. There is philosophy. Yeah, it doesn't mean exactly the same thing as we think today. Some kind of abstract theoretical subject that one can major in a university. Yep. So yeah, this idea that philosophy was kind of involved a commitment to a particular way of life, and was a much more holistic project. So that is fundamental to Hadot's argument, and I think it's very illuminating in terms of early Jewish literature, even though it hasn't really achieved or received that much attention in my field. So my first encounter with Hadot happened also at Yale, and it was also Hindi Naiman who asked us to read some of his work, and also some of Hindi Naiman's own work where she makes use of Hadot, and I don't know, I just found it somehow really illuminating, and it also kind of resonated with my own interest in philosophy. I remember when I studied theology, I was also interested in philosophy of religion and ethics, and I took some elective courses. We had to do some mandatory courses in those, but I also took some elective courses. But so I was on the one hand somehow fascinated, but then also somehow sometimes these subjects also bored me a bit, and I had this feeling that why to make simple things so unnecessarily complex, and maybe it was somehow this excessive focus on the cognitive at the expense of the lifestyle and the existential that made me, or that sometimes made the contemporary uni courses and philosophy a bit dry. But then it was really eye-opening for me to understand that philosophy, it has not always been like that, and that we can talk about philosophy as encompassing a lot of things that we don't associate with philosophy today, and of course in terms of philosophy, there has been Pierre Hadot, but also others, John Sellers and Cooper, and others who have written illuminating works. But then when it comes to my own area, biblical studies, I think there are two things. So on the one hand, the question of what is Judaism in the Second Temple period? So we think of Judaism as a religion, but there is no category for religion, neither in Hebrew nor in Greek. And for instance, Steve Mason has written about how would one understand Judaism in the ancient context. Of course, certain aspects of the Jewish tradition, like temple sacrifices, would have belonged to the sphere of cult, but these would have been visible in Jerusalem and in its environs. But then the majority of Jews lived in the diaspora in the Second Temple period. And in the diaspora context, these aspects of Judaism were not in any way dominant, and it was more the piety and study and moral instruction and mysticism, spirituality, way of life, things that people would have associated with Judaism, and these aspects that belong to the sphere of philosophy in the kind of Greek categorization. So it, I don't know, somehow rethinking this philosophy helped me also understand how one would have perceived Judaism in the ancient Mediterranean context. But then it also did make me see the early Jewish wisdom tradition in a different way, because somehow the conceptual parallel is so strong. Both ancient philosophy, as Hadot, for instance, presents it, and Jewish wisdom tradition, they ask the same questions about the good life or the cosmic order, but then they also involve ways of life and lifestyle commitments, and then this is something I understood after starting to engage with Hadot, and only after reading him I found out that, of course, like in Helsinki as well, I had colleagues in early Christian studies who had already made use of Hadot in their research, especially in terms of Gnosticism and the school of Valentinus, much before I was aware of this. And I think in early Christian studies, biblical scholars and scholars of religion were engaging with Hadot much before. So we in like Hebrew Bible studies, early Jewish studies, are kind of latecomers to the conversation. How does Hadot help us understand our material? And I think there have been some illuminating studies. For instance, Hindi Naiman uses Hadot to rethink pseudepigraphy and kind of get rid of the idea of pseudepigraphy as a forgery, and trying to think of pseudepigraphical literature as a generative mode of producing texts, and how the pseudepigraphical attribution could be a kind of spiritual exercise or way of emulating the exemplary biblical figure to whom the text is attributed. And then also later I did come across Daniel Harrington's small book. I can't remember what it's called, but it's on something like Jesus Pensira, Guide for Living, or something. But it's on the book of Pensira, and he does also very briefly draw on the idea of spiritual exercise, which is prominent in Hadot's model. But he was a professor of biblical studies, but also a Jesuit priest, so he does draw on the Ignatian tradition and understanding of spiritual exercise there. So in that tradition, spiritual exercises, meditations, and prayers on various things. So he also uses the term to introduce a method of reading the book of Pensira, and identifies 10 themes to contemplate, for instance, sin or death or virtues. So he's also another example of a scholar who has made use of Hadot, but I guess my interest was a bit different, to look at spiritual exercises in the early Jewish tradition. So various activities that help one to, or enable one to, in the pursuit of wisdom, or practice of wisdom. How does one achieve or retain wisdom? So that's where I thought that I can make use of Hadot, but I think there is still a lot to do, and I don't know, maybe it's something about a lot of people who work on Hebrew Bible and I also, we have a historical critical orientation, and these kind of more philosophical questions are not necessarily the questions that people first ask in a field where history and philology play such a big role. So maybe that has been a reason why it's been a bit slow, and not everyone gets excited about Hadot. That's also something I have found out during my career. But I think there is more to do.
Well, I would certainly agree. Yes, biblical studies has really been dominated for the last 150 years by the historical critical method. But I also think that there's something to, I think in some ways, if we want to get serious with the historical critical method, we should be serious also about the socio-historical context in which these texts were used in their earliest periods. So looking at Philo, and I can't, how did you say that? You said something about these biblical figures are models for the exegete, and Jacob
exemplary figures,
exemplary figures, And Jacob in this article is the exemplary figure for the wise person, the philosopher. There was something here that I wanted to quote. It's from book 3 of his allegorical commentary. If you have your essay with you, it's on page 276.
Yeah, I have just a minute. I'll open it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm on the wrong one. I'm on the wrong
one. The first one from who is the heir of divine things?
Yeah, who is the heir of divine things? That's the one that I wanted to start with here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to quote this. It's kind of long, but it lays out the different spiritual exercises.
Yeah.
Okay, so quote, incidentally, in the story of Jacob and Esau, and again, this is from Philo's Who is the Heir of Divine Things, which is part of his allegorical commentary series, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so quote, incidentally, in the story of Jacob and Esau, there are thoughts well worthy of our admiration. Esau, though he has the knowledge needed for the chase, is ever hunted and supplanted, because he has acquired his skill not to do good but harm, and moreover is never quick or zealous in his hunting. Jacob hunts passion not through learning, but moved to it by nature, and brings the game to the tester who will decide whether it will stand the test. You really get a sense of the philosopher here, the tester. For this purpose, the tester will eat of all that he brings. For all the elements of discipline are food fit for eating: investigation, examination, reading, listening, attention, self-mastery, and indifference to indifferent things. Of all these, the tester naturally eats samples only, not the whole. For the practicer must have his proper food left to him, like prizes for his efforts. Okay, so we have here Jacob as the exemplary philosopher. And we have some of the philosophical activities or spiritual activities. We have investigation, zetesis, examination, skepsis, reading, anagnosis, listening, akroasis, attention, prosochi, self-mastery, ankratia, and indifference to indifferent things. What's going on here? What is Philo doing in his reading of Jacob in this passage?
Yeah, no, as you said, it's part of his allegorical commentary, where he reads Genesis and wishes to interpret the text of the Genesis into light of his allegorical method. And in general, for Philo, Genesis, he writes somewhere that it's full of exemplars. Some are exemplars of virtue, and others exemplars of vice. But here now focus is on contrast between Esau and Jacob, and Esau is now the more negative figure, Jacob the positive one, and of course this is now he refers to Genesis 27, where Esau is sent to go hunt outside, and then he should bring game back to Isaac in order to receive the blessing from the father. But while he's outside, Rebecca prepares the favorite dish of Isaac, and then Jacob is able to get the blessing that was reserved for Esau. So here Philo has to do something to explain that how did this happen, and how can an exemplary figure do such a thing. And his interpretation is that, as you quote here, that Esau is the one who's a very skillful hunter, but he's got this skill to harm, whereas Jacob is the one who hunts passion, so something that needs to be removed and one needs to get rid of. and he's working hard to get there. And this is, of course, really interesting, this figure of Jacob, because already, Genesis, it's folklore. They're good stories, and Jacob is this kind of trickster figure who is a little bit ambiguous, but then he does become, after his second divine encounter, so he has a transformative experience, and he becomes Israel, and then the father of the 12 tribes, and in that sense, like he's extremely important figure in the biblical narrative as a whole. So there is this figure who is somehow integral, but also ambiguous. And I think then the way how Philo discusses and interprets the lives of the patriarchs, it makes use of this ambiguity of the figure. So he talks about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as, or associates them with three different ways of being wise. So Abraham is the one who becomes wise through instruction. Isaac, the tester, as he is called in this text, has inborn wisdom. So he's wise by nature. And then we have Jacob, who is the exemplary practicer. So he's associated with ascesis and practice. So he's not born wise, but he has somehow the right disposition to train himself towards the wisdom, and in that sense, he's the kind of perfect scriptural starting point for discussing a person who wants to train himself or herself and pursue wisdom, even if one does not possess it from the beginning. So it's also interesting in terms of this commentary culture, how he takes the biblical story as a starting point, and then how this exegesis is deeply intertwined with his philosophical vision, and how he reads a biblical text to produce philosophical literature in his own context, and to spell out the contemporary philosophical relevance of this ancestral text. So in a way, it's also some kind of translation process. So instead of translating the text from one language to another, he translates his ancestral inheritance to the audience who lives in this new cultural context in Alexandria, who has a different education, and then makes it relevant to them, and I think in that sense, like, I don't know, exegesis, of course, it can't really be anything else than philosophical in this context. If you think of Philo's own education, and also, like, for him, he never contrasts somehow Jewish exegesis or Greek philosophy with each other. So they're all kind of related, and I think this is other scholars have made this point, how they work together. And recently, for instance, I don't know if you know Jason Zurawski, who has studied Paideia in Second Temple Judaism, and also Philo. He makes this point about how Moses' Torah or Nomos, of course, has a special place in Philo's educational program, but he understands it in cosmic terms, and it's not just an ethnocentric code of contact, but it's an instruction book on how to live according to the universal nomos, and Moses and Greek philosophers both aim at the same, but of course, in Philo's view, Moses just does it better, and here it's now this nice folklore story that enables him to discuss the figure of Jacob as a practicer, someone who aims at wisdom, but is not there quite yet.
So, okay. So first of all, we should point out ascesis, which you translate here as discipline or training. It's where you get the word asceticism from. It's especially big in early Christianity with the rise of the monastic movement. But the first, it seems to me the first three, particularly here, are interrelated, even in this brief passage from Philo. On the one hand, you've got zetesis, investigation. My work on origin uses this or a cognate all the time, zeteo, the verb, and he'll invite his readers to investigate with him into something. And that's an invitation to take a closer look at a particular biblical text that they're talking about. And that's, of course, what Philo is doing here. He's investigating this story, this particular passage about Jacob and Esau, I think, as you said, in Genesis 27, and they're examining it. But there's also an act of reading that's going on here. And this, a question that I have has to do with, the immediate context. Because I know it's very debatable what Philo's immediate context in these commentaries was. Was he lecturing to students and this was being taken down and then later edited? Was he sitting alone at a desk and writing these out? And so all of these instructions here are simply for people who are going to read his works. Whichever way, there's certainly a school culture happening here, an educational culture, don't you think? And he's working out these different activities that students are supposed to embark upon in this philosophical way of life, using, in this particular case, Jacob as a model, but he uses Moses as a model, and many other places he uses Cain, Abel as he differentiates Cain and Abel in the same way he distinguishes between Jacob and Esau in one of his commentaries. What's your sense of the context of this?
I wish we would know more about the kind of historical realities of his activity, but I think, now that maybe the first point to make is that yes, it's a list of exercises, but it's not the only list of spiritual mental exercises that he makes. So he has two lists, and one of them is found in this text, who is the event thing and the things, and the other one in the allegorical commentary, but both are part of the allegorical series of allegorical works. So perhaps some kind of more advanced study, some would speculate, but these lists, so they are partly overlapping but not identical. So I don't think we should draw a conclusion that this is some kind of systematic, exhaustive presentation of how Philo imagined practice of philosophy in some kind of a school context. And in general, if we think of lists, it's just really difficult to interpret them because there's no syntax. So the author does not tell us how these different items of the list are related to each other, or what's their relation, or if there is a narrative behind it. But then at the same time, the process of making a list, it's also not fully arbitrary. When we make a list, the items of the list produce some kind of constellation. There's some reason to gather these concepts together, and therefore, we can assume that they have something to do with each other. And now, in the case of these two lists, so in both cases, Philo associates the lists with ascesis. So I think that's a clear indication that they are different types of exercises and practices. repetitive practices that are associated with ascesis, which training, discipline, practice of philosophy. So in that sense, they do help us imagine what Philo thought of the more lived and practiced aspect of philosophy as a way of life. But then, like, how to group the particular exercises in the lists, I think that could be done in different ways. Like, one could make a distinction between more cognitive and more psychological or social practices. I don't know, in my article, I did end up talking about them in 3 groups: more general learning methods, generally philosophical exercises, and then exercises that seem to have a particularly stoic tone or dimension to them. So first of all, he talks about reading and listening, which would be relevant in any educational context, any type of philosophy, and of course probably in Philo's philosophical program, then the Lamas of Moses would have had a particular place. But it is of interest that there are also many other practices, and these are just 2 of them. So for instance, the investigation and examination or critical inquiry. The difficulty is that, like, Philo also uses many of these terms in many ways, and other ancient authors writing in Greek use them in different ways. So it does seem difficult to fix and give a fixed meaning or know what Philo in this particular passage means with. But if we look at these lists in the light of other material, it does seem that this investigation, for instance, thesis could be something like investigation of the cosmos or virtue or another philosophical topic. Perhaps the same with skepsis. Of course, it could also have this connotation of attitude of epistemic humility and criticism. But the others, Meletai is interesting because it can be both a rhetorical exercise or more like meditation. But in the light of Philo's texts, it does look like it's probably some kind of meditative exercise. Remembrance of
the Meletai you talk about there, which gets translated into Latin as meditatio, and you bring that out in your article. Originally didn't have something to do with in the context of a doctor providing care for a patient, I think, wasn't it? I think it was originally like a medical term. Origen uses it all the time when he's talking about the study of the scriptures. He'll use that all the time in that context.
No, that is interesting. This because of course, like Philo, I mean, he talks about different melete on death and melete of the soul. So it could be different things, but he also, another exercise that he mentions here is an therapeiai, or some kind of therapeutic exercises, and it can of course mean worship of God, but also healing of the soul and passions. And then in that sense comes close to this idea of philosophy as a soul of medicine and this kind of connotation. So
I have okay, so the first one, no, I'm sorry, not the first one. In the first list, well, actually it's in both lists. Agnosis, reading. Reading in the ancient world must have been an arduous task. I mean, they didn't have spaces between letters. Although I think Hebrew was probably a little bit different than Greek, correct? I don't know if there were spaces between words. But I mean, certainly in Greek, you don't have that. You don't really have punctuation.
In the Dead Sea Scrolls, you don't have punctuation, but yeah, there is usually a space.
There are spaces. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are some differences.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of literature and how difficult it was for young children to learn how to read. And the arduous and oftentimes physically punishing aspects of education where students would get beat if they weren't keeping up. But philosophers often spoke of reading as therapeutic. I seem to recall, I think it was Galen, the doctor to, is it Marcus Aurelius, I think? Didn't he say something to the effect of whenever he reads anything from, was it anything from the Pythagoreans? I can't remember. He said when he reads somebody, he what is it? How does it go? He feels like it's therapy for the passions of the soul. I forget exactly how he said it. I think it's in his work on the healing of the soul, on the healing of the passions of the soul. But I can't remember. But it seems to me that reading was a pretty important task, but it also required some work. It wasn't like, us today who can pick up a book and, read very clear print. It was difficult for them, and it often required discussion, correct?
Yeah, and very few would have had access to that in the first place. So of course it would have different connotations in that context. But yeah, it is actually like I think Philo mentions this term anagnosis only in these two passages in his corpus.
Oh, really?
So in that sense, like figuring out what he exactly means with this particular term is a little bit difficult, but of course, in terms of listening or akrasis, he talks about listening to sacred scriptures and holy words. So yeah, very much possible that here it also he talks about now people who have done the basic school exercises, who can read literature and maybe even if he doesn't use the term there, but we could compare or think about the therapeutic again, a group of philosophers who dedicate themselves to a philosophical way of life, and of course study and interpretation of ancestral literature. Reading of ancestral literature is an integral component of their way of life. So yeah, that could also maybe help us imagine what Philo would have meant with that exercise. But in general, what Philo meant with the ascesis and pursuit of wisdom in practice, because his treatises can be quite lofty and not very interested in telling us about the everyday life. So of course, the Vita Contemplativa is also very idealized text, but at least it does help us imagine how Philo would have imagined actual people in his own time practicing philosophy and seeking wisdom.
I don't think it's a mere coincidence that reading and listening and attention, prosoki, are combined here in this list. I mean, reading, I know there's the traditional thesis that in antiquity all reading was done aloud. Some people have called that into question and says, well, there's probably some silent reading. But I think for the most part, it still stands, that it would have been reading aloud to make sure you're pronouncing things correctly, first of all. But if that was the case, then of course listening and paying attention would have been skills. So there's something here where he's saying, we're reading this and you better listen and pay good attention to me as skills for acquiring this the kind of knowledge he was trying to pass on.
And also if we think of, I don't know, synagogues, or also in terms of the therapeutic, the communal gatherings where someone reads or talks and others listen. So yeah, absolutely.
Do you think also, I think it's important to note here that, when Philo is talking about this stuff, he's working specifically with the Hebrew Bible, translation of it probably, but the Hebrew Bible nonetheless. He's not reading murder mysteries or textbooks with his audience. So there must be something also, not just with the act of reading and listening, but also the content of what people are reading and listening to. Wouldn't you say that the content is pretty important as well? I mean, you make a point in here that it's about reading ancestral literature.
Yeah. I mean, in the sense that, like, for Philo, of course, Moses is he's the best. He's the beginning of all philosophy, and origin of all philosophy, and Moses, Torah or Nomos is the, tells us how has this cosmic has cosmic relevance, and tells us or tells a person how to live according to the universal Nomos. So of course, in that sense, it's extremely important, the object of what is being read. And then Philo's point is that yes, these texts of Genesis that he interprets in an allegorical manner, that they are not just an ethnocentric code of conduct, but they actually tell a person how to live in a way that's aligns with the cosmic order. So,
well, and he says as much, doesn't he, in his on the creation of the world, De Opificio Mundi? Doesn't he start out by saying that Moses wrote these things down, and when he did it knowing that there was a consistency between what the law says in the written text, but also the laws of the cosmos, so that there was a harmony between what was said in Genesis and also how the world works. So there was something to this, the content of Genesis and the Old Testament, as something that is consistent with understanding the world as a whole.
Yeah, and of course Philo is not alone. If we, for instance, think of Fourth Maccabees, so there also the way the author uses the term nomos. Of course, it's associated with the nomos of Moses, but it's not like exhausted by it, or it has also this cosmic dimension to it. So in that sense, it's part of and also, like, if we look at the way how Second Temple Jewish authors make use of the term Torah, it's very open-ended, and it's certainly like not at all clear where Torah refers to. So scholars often just think, okay, Torah, it's the 5 books of Moses, or Pentateuch, or perhaps a wider collection of scripture. But then, like, many scholars have made the argument in recent years, myself included, that it does seem that in late Second Temple Jewish sources, Torah, it's this kind of ever-growing body of divine instruction. It's not a closed body of literature. So in some ways, of course, these authors who write in Greek, they use the concepts of the Greek culture, and those terms bring their own set of connotations and associations with them, but then also in I don't think there is a reason to think of Torah in the Hebrew or other Semitic texts of the same period in any very narrow way either. So
probably would have had a multiplicity of meanings depending on the context in which it was used.
Absolutely, and that's of course the whole term Torah. It just means instruction. So it does enable different connotations, and then different authors might also have a different.
I'm kind of reminded when I was working on my dissertation, I read some of the Sifra on Deuteronomy, which I think came out of the the Palestinian rabbinical tradition, quite close to origin in Caesarea or close to it. And I seem to recall there is in one passage they're discussing what was it oh, I cannot remember the name of the passage, but the topic of the debate was whether it was more important to know the law or to do it, to like to learn the law. And I don't know if what they were talking about there was Torah or not, but the debate was certainly whether or not to attain some kind of intellectual grasp of the law or to actually perform the law in one's daily life. Which brings me, I think, to a question that I was kind of hoping to spend a little bit of time on before we end. So I think whatever we think of like the individual exercises and how to conceptualize them in practice, it's their end, what purpose they were used for. I think that's quite important to bring it out in your paper. So I'm going to quote you now on page 283. Exercises with a Stoic flavor. Quote, finally, many of the exercises that constitute Jacob's ascesis have a primarily Stoic flavor. These include attention, attitude of indifference, and accomplishment of duties, self-mastery, and therapies. Some of these are more interior exercises, and others have a social function, orienting outwards from the subject. But each aims at creating habits in one way or the other, end quote. Now, I think this is a very crucial point, whether they're interior or social, how they look in practice. Philo is clearly trying to guide his readers or his students in the process of creating particular kinds of habits. Can you talk a little bit about that, whether Stoic or not, but the important point of developing habits?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, if we think of it in general, like what's the purpose of life for Philo, it's not just to be alive, but it's to have a good life, to be able to flourish as a human being. And then the way he describes that good life clearly involves education and formation of the person and cultivation of virtue. And then he has, of course, his own educational model of how does that process unfold. You start with like encyclical studies and propedeutic instruction, and then later some people move on to practice philosophy, the pursuit of wisdom, and with the intention of becoming sage, even though very few would become sages. But it's still this process of paideia, the pursuit of wisdom, love of wisdom, that's integral, and this is not just to know, but it's also to know things, but it's also about formation. And I think that's also, it's not just Philo, but also Jewish wisdom literature in general, that of course it's it can be useful and important to know certain things, but that's not the end goal of education or formation or practice. But the end goal is some kind of formation, and that does include different types of elements. It can be intellectual formation, but then at the same time it also involves practices that help one, I don't know, control their inner life, or kind of psychological capacities, or like, I don't know, attention or remembrance of good things, or being indifferent to indifferent things, but then also some of these practices aim at forming the way a person lives in a society, lives together with other people, and also in these lists, Philo, for instance, talks about I think it's the other list, is it, where he mentions the accomplishment of duties. So
yes,
so how human beings also have duties towards other social duties, and so forth. Self-mastery, of course, if a person is able to control their emotions, that also affects the life of other people. So anyway, so it's kind of, there are different types. The formation has multiple dimensions, including taking care of practical applications towards other people, but then, of course, like in Philo's model, he has this idea of that if you really want to dedicate yourself to wisdom or philosophy, then eventually you somehow also steer away from the physical aspect of things, and that's again something we see in the Vita Contemplativa, that how they sort of reject possessions in order to pursue the contemplative way of life, and in that way you can really focus on eternal realities that enable you to know God, and therefore attain happiness or well-being, eudaimonia, and perhaps have some kind of mystic vision that results in a union with God. But of course, it's he also like makes this point that it's rare to become a sophist, it's rare to attain wisdom, but at the same time, wisdom never closes her school, and people are invited to come and encourage it to come and pursue wisdom, and exercise wisdom, and that is that it has an intellectual dimension to it, but it's certainly not exhausted by the intellectual. It has also social and psychological aspects, and I think this is why, like, for instance, there is this one article by David Hay where he wrote about being really puzzled by the Vita Contemplativa, that how can this work have anything to do with philosophy when Philo doesn't explain like what are their ideas or beliefs, and I think it's just sort of misunderstanding what is philosophy in this context. If we take seriously this idea of philosophy as a way of life, of course, it's then natural that Philo writes a biography of a group of philosophers and describes how they actually practice philosophy in practice, and then also like so maybe that does help like us to also take seriously and see kind of Philo's original contribution as a philosopher, which is not always clear. Now, for instance, I can remember when I was as a postdoc, I spent 1 year at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and I took a course on Philo with Mara Niehoff, and then she asked us to read some article about Philo's kind of intellectual context and philosophical schools. And I can't remember anymore even the name and the topic of the article or the author, but what I remember was that like in the article the author like went through different things in Philo's thinking, showing how eclectic and he is as a thinker and fascinating thinker. And then somehow in the very last page, like the author anyway came to the conclusion that oh, but Philo is an exegete and not a philosopher. And I was like, oh, why? And I thought it was so funny that first the author had used the whole article to show all the cool things Philo does, and then in the end having to say that, oh, but he's not a real philosopher. And I remember when I addressed it, observation, Varaniho said something like, it does seem that some people have difficulty in acknowledging that Philo could have an original contribution or something. So somehow, like, if we take this philosophy as a way of life seriously, and if we take commentary culture as part of the philosophical culture of his time, it's also something other discusses. I think it does help us see how Philo is also quite an original thinker in some ways, and what he does, it just naturally flows from his position, and he adds something to the Greek philosophical discourse from his kind of multicultural background that draws on different traditions, and where scriptural commentary and specific way of life with kind of formative practices is integral.
That reminds me, I gave a public lecture when I was a doctoral student in Toronto, and afterwards, it was on Origen and his homilies on the Psalms, and afterwards, someone from the audience comes up to me and asked me a question. I don't remember what the specific question was, but then she said, well, that's why Origen was a philologist, not a philosopher. And a philosopher can't be a philologist, and a philologist can't be a philosopher. And it just, that seems to be an idea that has stuck around for far too long, and it's time for it to go away. It seems to me, and I don't know, maybe we can close on this. Would you say for Philo, doing exegesis was an act of philosophy, or what was it? I mean, it must have been an integral part of his philosophical program anyways.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, of course, he also writes different types of texts, but a great deal of his corpus focuses on biblical commentary, and he reads it to spell out its kind of philosophical relevance, and to explain that to an audience. So yes, but I don't think it's only Philo. So as I briefly mentioned, in his book What is Ancient Philosophy, Hadot also talks about this, how philosophy changes in the Roman period, and how because of these changes we should think of commentary culture as an integral aspect of philosophical training and practice in this period. So in this time, we're talking about the spreading of learning centers throughout the Mediterranean region. So of course that would have changed also the way how methods of teaching philosophy, or what the methods of teaching philosophy were. So one didn't anyone need to necessarily to go to a particular place to work with in the context of a particular philosophical school, and in that sense, one could have easier access to different schools and their ideas, in different places, and also the blend of ideas between schools became easier. So but then of course, it meant that when one didn't go anymore to one place to study with the founding figure or the center around the founding figure. So then this link between the the ancestral figures and the contemporary practices of philosophy became weaker, and that's why, according to other textual sources, become really important. And yeah, the text is provides the philosopher or the lover of wisdom with access to the school, and then commentary on text becomes the mode of philosophical practice. And of course, yeah, we see also Philo, he's not writing in Jerusalem, he's writing in Alexandria, away from the ancestral land, but he can nevertheless take part in the tradition and renew the tradition in his own context through the commentary, while at the same time producing texts that count as Greek philosophical literature.
That's right. Yep. That's right. Yeah, the text almost becomes like the medium for these philosophers to work on. Perhaps, as we've kind of intimated, philosophical departments or philosophical faculty and biblical studies faculty can have something to learn from people like Philo, that philosophy is not just about ideas, and it does require texts and work and analysis, but also biblical scholars can maybe open up to some of the more philosophical ways of text. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
ideally
has
it gets everyone a little bit out of the ideally it gets everyone a bit out of the comfort zone or the traditional way of doing things, and then opens the new.
Well, Dr. Uusimäki, thank you very much for a very fun and fascinating conversation on Philo of Alexandria and the spiritual exercises. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was really nice to chat.
Well, till next time, I will see you later. Everybody have a good week. See ya.